Going beyond the headlines. Asking the questions you want answered. Exploring government policies and how they impact you. We are delving deeper.
Good evening and welcome to Delving Deeper. I'm your host, Sonolala. Joining us this evening are Senator the Honorable Reginald Armour, SC, the Attorney General and the Minister of Legal Affairs, the Honorable Ayanna Webster-Roy, the Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister, Gender and Child Affairs, and Mrs. Farzana Nazir-Mohammed. She is the Director of the Criminal Justice Unit at the Office of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs. Welcome back, everyone, to the show.
Thank you,
Thank you
so
so much.
So we want to start off today with, in terms of what would be the focus of the upcoming public consultation on domestic violence, and it's a question for all of you.
Well, for me, the focus of the upcoming consultation on Wednesday is to remind our society that we have a challenge that has existed for a very long time. It is a challenge that many of us prefer not to acknowledge because we think it's private family business that we shouldn't get involved in. And it is to alert the society to two things in particular. One, that this is a community. Trinidad and Tobago is a community in which we have to be our neighbor's keeper. We have to care for our neighbors. And if something comes to our attention that demonstrates that our neighbor is in trouble, we need to step up and reach out to that neighbor, hold that person's hand. And the second thing that I think this consultation is hoping to achieve is to have the more important stakeholders who are responsible for offering the levels of protection to the citizenry, to have an open conversation with the citizens who will come to this stakeholder consultation, to listen to the concerns that people will express, and themselves, the stakeholders who will be on the panel discussion, to answer candidly about how they are dealing with the challenge, where the inadequacies might exist, their willingness and flexibility to acknowledge that we have a lot of room to improve, even while we are proud, as Minister Ayanna Webster-Roy has told us, even while we are proud of the significant steps that are being made, in particular through the Office of the Prime Minister, Ministry of Child and Gender Affairs. And hopefully out of that sense of awareness, we will be able to come away with a commitment going forward that the people who need help are confident that they are being listened to.
Now, this public consultation takes place at the Hyatt Regency Hotel this coming Wednesday. Ms. Mohammed, just your thoughts in terms of, what do you think the areas of focus would be and what's this going to achieve?
So, Sunil, certainly part of legislative reform is consultation, and the forum really provides the avenue for not just key stakeholders, but the public, a very important voice in legislative reform, to air whatever concerns and suggestions and recommendations. So it's really hoped that the forum will encourage persons to speak up, and also for agencies themselves to be able to honestly reflect on what the deficiencies might be, and for all of us to approach it together and see how we could find and help agencies to fulfill their roles and their responsibilities and really confront challenges in a very open and honest way, so that the public can feel a sense of comfort that it's not a talk shop. It really is meant to be a very deep dive exercise into what the challenges are, and let's see how we can face them together.
Minister, I know they would have taken probably all the possible answers, but in terms of telling us, what do you want to see this achieve from this national public consultation?
Action and commitment. We have to stop operating in silos and start to really be integrated and more collaborative. And it's an opportunity for the advocates and for the NGO sector to sit at the table with us and to really help to guide us. I often say they are the ones on the ground. They are more connected because they're every day interacting with the key stakeholders. So it's their opportunity to lend their voice to shape better legislation. And at the end of the day, I'm hoping for a safer, more loving, more stable Trinidad and Tobago. And I want to encourage persons, this is your opportunity to lend your voice, to be the change that you want to see. Although it might sound cliche, this is your chance to shape the future of Trinidad and Tobago. And again, I just want to take this opportunity to thank all those advocates who would have been pushing and prodding and encouraging. I remember for 16 days of activism in a television interview, the issue of protection orders came up and they said, yes, we're happy that you all did all of that first, but we want more. This is your chance to get the more that you've been asking for. So please come out and give your support.
Minister, what I wanted to ask you about our segment yesterday was to bring Tobago into the fold. How prevalent are we seeing domestic violence and domestic violence issues in the Sister Isle?
Well, as you know, I'm a Tobagonian, and one of the things we're very good at is cover up and to hide. Domestic violence is real. The numbers in Tobago for such a small society, they are unacceptable. And I'm hoping that through this consultation, and Tobagonians would use the opportunity to learn. Knowledge is power. To understand that what we might think is okay, is the norm, it's acceptable, that it ain't right. And I want to get into my Tobago parlance and talk to my fellow Tobagonians. We had to step up the game. As an elected representative, as a minister, as a Tobagonian living in Tobago, deep countryside Tobago, I know fully the trauma, the impact of the trauma, not only on the victims themselves, but our wider communities. And we really have to, as I said before, Tobagonians, we really have to stand united in this campaign to end domestic violence and gender-based violence and all forms of violence. Not only in Tobago, but in Trinidad and Tobago. What happens in Tobago affects Trinidad. What happens in Trinidad affects Tobago. So I want to encourage Tobagonians to start speaking up, speaking out. Mark for the right things. You have to do that. Mark for the right reasons. And to start lending our voices towards a culture of change, where our mindsets change, where our attitudes change, and our values change for the better.
As we're talking about gender-based violence, the gender-based violence unit was set up just about 4 years ago. Are you able to tell us how many reports were made to this unit in terms of arrests and convictions as well?
So I want to focus on the data for 2023, and it might be alarming. In 2023, we had just over 5,000 reports. In terms of arrests, we had less than 200. And in terms of convictions, we had less than 40. So you can see the room for improvement there. And the good thing is, even though the numbers might be high in terms of reports, that means that people are becoming aware and they're being brave enough to report, to step up and to seek help. And I want to encourage others to speak up. And even while I'm encouraging others to speak up, even though the numbers may seem alarming, it is one of the motivating factors for us to do what we are doing here, to ensure that the number of arrests would increase, the number of convictions will increase, but ultimately that we put the right measures in place to reduce the numbers by putting out the services for the perpetrators as well as the victims, strengthening the coordination of the response, but most importantly, changing the culture and the mindset so that we get to a place where Trinidad and Tobago adopts and accepts an attitude of zero tolerance to all forms of violence, specifically domestic violence.
AG, among those charged for domestic violence, we've seen members of the protective services, including the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. Now, we know police officers, they carry a firearm, a firearm user's license. Seeing that they physically or mentally, as it were, abuse, these suspects abuse their spouses and so on, is this enough for that to take away their government-issued firearm user's license from them?
I think in almost every case it is appropriate. The law allows it, and I know from the conversations that I've been having with the police that there are protocols that the police have within the service. The minute a domestic violence report comes in and is assessed by the police service as a credible report, the police are required by the law to suspend up to a couple of years, if necessary, to suspend the licenses of those police officers while the report is being investigated. And there are very strong protocols to make sure that they set the example amongst themselves, because at the end of the day, the motto of the police service is to protect and serve. And therefore, if they're going to protect and serve, and one of them is charged with an offense or has a report of domestic violence, then they have to set the example and maintain very strict protocols.
I know you said this is protocol for the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and probably members of the protective services as well, but should this rule also apply to members of the general public that hold a firearm user's license and are involved in domestic violence issues?
Yes, absolutely, and the Commissioner of Police has the power to suspend a firearms user's license and to take the firearm away from a civilian who is licensed to carry and use a firearm. So again, it all goes back to what we've been talking about. The minute that report comes in, it has to be properly investigated, it has to be assessed, it is credible, it has to be corroborated by talking to the neighborhood, and once the police are satisfied that a case has been made out that demonstrates real cause for concern on the credibility of that report, then I think it is manifest that in the exercise of his or her discretion, the Commissioner of Police, who has the power, can suspend the license and remove that firearm from the possession of the perpetrator, the alleged perpetrator, while the charge is being investigated and dealt with in a court of law.
AG, what does the law say in particular for police officers who fail to act on a report of domestic violence?
At the end of the day, you have a difference between what the law says and what the disciplinary process is, and there are certainly disciplinary processes available to the police service for any police officer who fails to carry out his or her duties. And the law is very strict that a police officer under the Domestic Violence Act must act on a domestic violence charge or a report, and it sets out the procedures that are to be followed. And if at the end of the day, the police superior, looking at the record, the station diary, the reports that are being taken in, recognizes that this police officer is not discharging his or her duty, the police can act in terms of disciplinary procedures and more severe consequences.
To Ms. Mohammed or Minister, in terms of, we talked about psychiatrists and psychologists earlier on, treating these victims and maybe even abusers of domestic violence to try to get them on the right path and so on. But do we have that service available in the government service as well?
Definitely. Through the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, specifically the Family Services Division, we have counseling services available, as well as there are social workers who work alongside families. As it pertains specifically to children, the Children's Authority is the first responder, and there's access to a myriad of psychosocial support services available to children there. I want to encourage persons to reach out to 800-COPE, that is the hotline number under the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. There's also a similar support system and agency in Tobago through the Division of Health, Wellness and Social Protection. Help is available. The key thing is to take that brave first step and to reach out for help, because we are there waiting to assist.
What I would add, Sunil, is that through the family court, there are programs that are available, and the court can order that the perpetrator enroll in those programs. And that's very important, because having the perpetrator benefit from a program where they can voice their issues and be able to speak in a controlled environment can really do so much to diffuse a situation that can go very quickly from domestic violence to preventing a murder from happening or further escalation of the situation. So there are certainly programs and facilities that can be accessed through the court, where the person applies for a protection order and the court can order those services.
Sunil, I think one of the things that we need to recognize and discuss more as we are addressing the question of gender-based violence, domestic violence, is that the two parties in the relationship both need help. The victim who is being beaten and the assailant who is doing the beating are both damaged human beings. And there's a reason why the person who is doing the beating has become a beater. And that's where we need more engagement at the institutional level. And I'm very encouraged to hear the work through Minister Webster-Roy that her ministry is doing. That's where we need more engagement of our psychologists to be able to come in and speak with people, to be able to relate to people and help them to understand that they need help, and to give them the pathways to find ways in which to get that help through counseling, through monitoring, through following up. And that's one of the things that I'm hoping out of this consultation we are going to be able to highlight. One of our panelists is going to be a psychologist, and I have spoken with different psychologists since we took the decision to have this consultation, and I am looking forward to hearing the psychologists tell the public what can happen, what we need to be looking for, and how we can help both the victim and the perpetrator, who are equally in need of help to get to rise into this challenge.
Is there a need to bring more psychologists or psychiatrists into the sphere of domestic violence to help locally?
Well, I know that there are already a sufficient number of psychologists in the family court, which is a very vibrant institution within the civil court system. And I actually had the privilege, when I had just taken office, I went on a tour. I was taken on a tour of the family court by Chief Justice Archie, and the Family and Children's Court, by the way, the Family and Children's Court. And I was, as a litigator who has spent 30 years in litigation in the civil courts, in the constitutional courts, accustomed to the austere stereotype of what a courtroom looks like, gray and, whatever colors that, you see when you go into a courtroom. When you walk into the family court, the Family and Children Court, some of them are playrooms, children's playrooms. And the way in which the judges in the family court, the Family and Children's Court, deal with young children who come in with problems is literally to sit on the floor in a playroom with toys and paintings on the wall and have conversations with these young children, first to make them feel comfortable, to make their parents comfortable in an environment that they can relate to, and then to begin the process of healing. And that is something that we need to recognize more in how we approach addressing the problem that we are dealing with: gender-based violence, domestic violence. We need to be sensitive to being more flexible, more responsive, and to create an enabling environment in which we help the victims of this scourge to heal.
There's a term called recidivism, where criminals, in terms of commit a crime, and if they are released back out and they commit a crime again, they go back into the system. Do we see that as well in terms of perpetrators in the system? Do they go back into that sphere? How successful is it to get them on that path?
An initiative we have is what we call the virtual town hall sessions, right? Town hall meetings. And we recently, like last year, had a town hall which was domestic violence from the eyes of a perpetrator reformed. And he gave his story, but he also gave the stories of other men who would have been perpetrators, been through the system and became perpetrators again. And he stressed the importance for continuous support and follow-up. So that is something as a system, as a government system, we have to look at strengthening, that the support isn't one and stop, but it's consistent, continuous, but we can't do it alone. And that is where the NGOs come in. And that is why it's so important for us to help to empower them, do capacity building for the NGOs, as well as give them the resources. And as I said before, the Minister of Finance has been quite generous to Gender and Child Affairs, but a lot of the support we get from the UN system, and I want to acknowledge that.
So, Ms. Mohammed, we've seen increased efforts coming after an act of domestic violence has occurred. How do we basically ensure that this doesn't happen in the first place?
So I don't necessarily agree with that concept that action is only taken after an act occurs. I think what happens is, particularly where there's a murder-suicide, there's a lot of media coverage for that particular incident. What needs to happen is more coverage on the sustained work that is taking place over the years. We've heard so much from Minister Webster-Roy. So much work has been put in by the state agencies, collaborative work. So much services are available, but there isn't enough focus on educating the public on those services, and that's something we certainly need to look at and improve upon. So in addition to the substantial and incredible work that Minister Webster-Roy spoke about, there has also been a lot of work by the judiciary. The judiciary actually formed a domestic violence multi-sector committee, and there's the development of domestic violence rules, and they've been looking at ways in which the legislation can be improved. We also see the police service. There's creation of standing orders, there's training for police officers, ongoing training for how to treat with victims who come to the police station. So there's a lot of work that is happening, but as I mentioned, the spotlight needs to be constantly on the work and not just when there's an incident that occurs.
As we wrap up, Ms. Mohammed, your final remarks?
So from a criminal justice perspective, I want to remind the public that domestic violence is a crime, and we need to consider that children and homes that domestic violence is prevalent breeds criminality. And so even if you may not be aware of a domestic violence situation, even if you may not be a victim of domestic violence, it's all of our collective responsibility to have an interest in this. Whether you're a teacher, a neighbor, a relative, we all need to come together and see this as an opportunity to not just reduce the incidence of domestic violence, but also have a direct impact on the level of criminality in our society. And I want to close really by making an appeal to victims out there who may feel fearful, who may feel hesitant to step forward. Please know that there is so much support, so much services. Come forward and know that there are persons who are here to help you take back control of your life and come out of that situation.
Final thoughts from you, Mrs. Webster-Roy?
I would like to remind Trinidad and Tobago that ending gender-based violence doesn't just depend on the government or the civil society groups or the advocates. It requires an all-hands-on-deck approach. It's all our business, so your voice is important. I want to take the opportunity to invite everyone, not leaving out the little boys and the little girls. All voices are important to be part of the process. Please join us for this consultation. And again, I want to thank the Honorable AG and his team for creating this opportunity for us to put a spotlight on a very critical national issue. And just to say that better days are coming. Trinidad and Tobago, better days are definitely coming.
AG, your closing remarks?
My closing remarks, Sunil, are straightforward and simple. I want to emphasize, as I listened this evening to Minister Webster-Roy and Farzana speak on a subject that we are all passionate about, it drove home to me that not only that we are a community which cares, but that I am part of what we in the cabinet refer to as a whole of government approach. Because since we launched the idea of this consultation, and we've been sharing thoughts and ideas with Minister Webster-Roy about the work that her ministry is doing, you realize that we are all working on the same thing with equal passion. We are complementing each other. And now what we are doing by this consultation is to reach out to the public and to invite the public to join with us to fix and to improve and to help our nation, Trinidad and Tobago, to heal.
Well, over the last 2 days, we've been speaking to Minister Ayanna Webster-Roy, AG Armour, and Mrs. Mohammed about domestic violence. Ahead of that public consultation, we'll see in a couple of days at the Hyatt Regency on Wednesday that public consultation, the national public consultation on domestic violence. It certainly has been a very elaborate discussion we've had over the last 2 days, and I think the public would have been much informed of what we've had over the last 2 days.
Thank you, Sunil.
Thank you.
And you can catch the conversation online on the AGLA's social media platforms. Join us at the same time next week for another episode of Delving Deeper. I am Sonolala. On behalf of the entire group, have a great night.